I am the man who kindles the flame. I used to be like you. I used to be normal. I had a life. I had a family. A wife and a daughter. Things used to be so ordinary. Until he arrived. I had just gotten home from the shithole where I worked. A stupid little desk job that made me a good amount of money. I had just hung up my coat and put my briefcase down when the front door slammed shut behind me. It was odd, I remember thinking to myself. Why did the door suddenly just shut on its own? I concluded that it was the wind. It was autumn after all, and Halloween was just around the corner. What scared me more though was the silence that followed. Usually, when I got home, the TV would be on with some Disney movie. The timer for dinner would be going off or the tea kettle would be screaming. But the only thing I heard was silence. I walked into the living room to see nothing. Sure, all the furniture was the same and the pictures of my family were there. But they physically weren't. Ryan. I called. My wife's name. No answer. Soph. My daughter. No answer. This is where I began to freak out. They had to be in the house somewhere. The cars were in the driveway and it even looked like Ryan was setting up for dinner. But where were they? And before you ask, yes, I searched around my whole house. Nothing. There was no sign of my family. After running like a chicken with my head cut off looking for them, I tried to use my phone. And can you believe it? No cell service. We had gotten rid of our landline a long time ago, so there wasn't anything an electronic could do. I contemplated going to the neighbors until I saw a shadow in the back hallway by my daughter's room. Who's there? I asked. No response. I walked a little closer to see the outline of a man. I was confused. Why was there a random man in my house? Suddenly, it darted into my daughter's room. Panic filled my entire body as it bolted down the hall and into her bubblegum bedroom. The man was standing by the window that overlooked the backyard. A line of trees blew in the wind as I looked past him outside at the dying trees. It was oddly calm in the room. A strange man and I, standing in my missing daughter's bedroom. It reminded me of some slasher movie where it was finally the main character's turn to die. I remember thinking that. Was I going to die? Would I ever get to see my family again? At least if I died, I wouldn't have to go back to that shithole job. My thoughts faded as they slowly turned towards me. That's when all the blood drained from my body. This thing wasn't a man at all. Its body was burnt to a crisp. The skin on its mangled body hung off like a zombie or something. I wondered how it could still move even though it was so badly burnt. You could see the outline of bone and muscle throughout its body. It was a mess of black charcoal and red skin. The hair on top of its head hung off in strands and flopped over onto its face. Its eyes were nowhere to be seen. Black circles filled the area where eyes were supposed to be, and its nose was merely a hole. Its lips were charred off, and as it began to speak, all I could hear were raspy breaths of hot air that flooded towards me. Its quick breathing reminded me of when I was little and had to do breathing treatments when I was sick. What really stunned me was this thing was wearing clothes. The trench coat that hung from its bony frame was well intact. The only thing wrong with it was the ends were burnt. Even its shoes were very well preserved. Honestly, this thing looked like it had been in and out of a bonfire twice. The number of burns was so immense it sickened me to even look at this thing's chest rise and fall. I could not believe how well this thing was holding up. I opened my mouth to speak when it moved its hands to hold something out to me. Pieces of hair. Brown curly hair and straight blonde hair. My wife and daughter's colors. I stopped breathing for a second when it swiftly moved its hands back into its pockets. I tried to reach out to the creature but was stopped as a voice flooded the room. I stared directly at the creature as its mouth fell open to let out the clearest voice I have ever heard. It wasn't moving its mouth and would occasionally take in long breaths of air to continue talking. But it talked to me nevertheless. I am the man who kindles the flame. It began. I've come here because my time is up. You have been chosen to replace me in keeping this plane safe. I stared at this thing in horror. What the fuck was I looking at? What the fuck was I listening to? Material things are not a necessity to you anymore. You must come with me at once to begin your training." I began to get angry when it said this. It had my wife and daughter's hair in its pockets. I wanted to know what happened to them, where they were. I needed to know. "What the fuck did you do to my family?" I spat. It stared at me and softened a bit. Its shoulders dropped and it let out a big breath. "Must I always explain these things?" It began. I said, "Material things aren't a necessity anymore. These creatures only dragged you down for your true purpose. Life was a bore. Was it not? Did you hate your job? Did you hate coming home to a wife that was most likely cheating on you? To a daughter who was most likely not yours? Did you know your wife had been seeing other men?" Well, I was in shock. What? What was this thing saying? "I had been watching you. That's why I chose you. You have nothing to live for anymore. Why waste your time with this playhouse when you could be serving a greater purpose than your miserable life?" I thought a bit. It was true. I did know Ryan was seeing other men. I knew that Soph probably wasn't my daughter. Ryan only stayed with me for the money, for the financial stability I brought her. I had tricked myself into loving someone who had been with me since high school. I thought she was the love of my life. But now she was gone. Both of them were gone. Maybe there was nothing to lose with this deal. What would I have to do? I asked curiously. The thing closed its mouth and grinned a bit. It raised a hand and snapped its brittle fingers. That's when I blacked out. When I woke up, I was sitting in the hottest room I had ever been in. In front of me was a flame. A little campfire to exact. The room was black and the only light was from this flame. I looked around to see a shadow on the side of the room. Him. He walked towards me, slow and steady, and bent down to whisper in my ear. "You're at the center of the earth. You're the heart of the planet, the plane between life and death. You must protect this flame with your life. Never let anyone near it. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, do not let anyone but you touch this flame. If you do, the world will be sent into a descent of darkness. The heavens will collapse and the dead will rise." Well, shit. What did I get myself into?